go ahead and start the recording now. It'll take just a second to get going. There it goes. I'm Eric Barrett, as you know, Mahoning County and Area 10 here in Northeast Ohio. And we're very pleased to have Dr. Gene Kritsky from Mount St. Joseph University, one of the leading cicada experts in the country, with us. He has tons of maps and even has apps that he's going to talk about that we can help document some of the emergence happening here in Northeast Ohio, and also help answer those questions that the public has about the scariness of the emergence. We've already had a couple we talked about in our clinic is Mondays and Thursday mornings, and we already had a couple crazy questions today. Our big article came out in the paper to start the excitement, and we had questions because of that, and questions because people were worried about their landscape. So welcome to Gene Kritsky from Mount St. Joseph. Just a couple little notes before he starts. We are typing our questions into the chat box. So if you have a question, type that in, and then I will get those questions to him as we go through, or he might see them, but I'll make sure he notes those questions for you. We're recording this, so we'll be able to watch it later and share it with others. So with that, welcome, Gene.
Thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here. This is kind of fun. All of you in little boxes on the left of my screen is kind of fun, but my goal this evening is to bring you all up to speed so that you can help your visitors and people enjoy this emergence. It's these things are a lot of fun. I usually prepare a couple of weddings a year for cicadas. People get kind of scared, but I have people calling me where they can have their wedding that they won't have cicadas. I've had people call to have cicadas at their weddings. So I've helped people plan their vacation. I've had a woman by the name of who's I think her name was, she said it was Joni. I think she's in her 70s, and she's quite worried about the cicadas, and so she's been calling and is not looking forward to what's going to happen. But my goal this evening is to give you a cicada primer, and without further ado, let's start. Cicadas are bugs of history. The oldest historical record that we have of periodical cicadas, as you can see here, this is from the original. This is from the History of Plymouth Colony, written by William Bradford, the second governor of Plymouth Colony. And he wrote, you'll notice the date says 1633. It's quite possible it really was 1634. He wrote this several years later. But he wrote, and you can see this starting on the at the top of that the unit just below there. He wrote, and the spring before, especially all the month of May, there was such a quantity of a great sort of flies, like for bigness to wasps or bumblebees, which came out of holes in the ground and replenished all the woods, and ate the green things, and made such a constant yelling noise as made the woods ring of them, and ready to deaf the hearers. They have not by the English been heard or seen. They have not by the English been heard or seen before or since. But the Indians told them that sickness would follow, and so it did in June, July, August, and the chief heat of summer. Now, the cicadas had nothing to do with the sickness, but this is the oldest historical record, written record of periodical cicadas. What makes it kind of interesting is that 1633 was a brood 13 year, and brood 13 does not occur in Massachusetts, but brood 14 does. So it's quite probable that it's 1634 was the date this actually happened. And so there was a follow-up with other references that occurred in the 17th century, but these truly are bugs of history. The first sign that people are going to see of cicadas, and some of you might have seen these, they were much more exciting in the past, but these are the cicada turrets. After time with a heavy rain, these cicadas, just like crayfish, will build up these little chimneys. And what's going on if you've got a high clay soil, water starts to collect in their tunnel. These tunnels range between 8, 9 inches in depth, and I just got a text coming in from a remote control request. I'm not sure what that means, but we'll go on for that. So they'll actually take and if it's a heavy rain, those tunnels can actually fill up with water. So the cicadas go up and about, stay above the water, build these little chimneys. And you can see the one on the second from the right there, that would go up almost 6 to 8 inches. I've seen these as tall as 10 inches in height. As the water subsides, the cicadas go back down. But it's easy to find these in people's yards, usually starting in late April and early May. So this is possibly the first sign that you'll see of cicadas in a given area, especially after a heavy rain. They emerge when the soil temperature reaches 64 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit, and they emerge from these holes in the ground. This will date me, but they emerge from holes about the size of big fat pencils I used in first grade. I guess we don't use them anymore. Like, well, this particular photograph is of the most dense emergence site I've ever found. This area here had 356 cicadas emerge in a 1 square yard area. So this is probably one of the densest I've seen. The densest ever studied was close to 1,000. That was Brood 4 in Kansas back in the 80s. Of course, what happens is these holes are the emergence holes where the cicadas come from. Here is a cicada actually caught on camera coming out. I was doing working with a Japanese film crew from their version of 60 Minutes, and they had all these lights set up. And of course, cicadas are going to avoid the light. And so I have to walk behind the cameras and notice that all around the cameras, but in the darkness, were these cicadas popping up. So we were able to get a picture of one coming right out of the soil. They do that to start their climb up a upright surface. These are the nymphs that had just emerged, crawling up. This is a bark of a tree. They do that in order to find an upright surface so they can lock their tarsal claws into the tree, where they can start the process of transforming to the adult. And I hope many of you have seen this in the past. If you haven't, it's like having a David Attenborough in your backyard doing a nature show. But they find a nice spot, lock their little tarsal claws into the tree, and then they start splitting their nymphal skin, the exuvia, or sometimes called shells, start splitting in the back, as you can see here. And underneath it, you'll see this all-white adult cicada beginning to emerge. They slowly split that, and then with muscle contraction, sort of pull their body out of that shell, eventually hanging upside down. Those white filaments are actually the tracheal tubes, the breathing apparatus for the insects that get pulled inside out. I mean, if you thought puberty was a gut-wrenching experience, this really is amazing. And it's held, these cicadas are only held in place by the tension of the skin that's holding it tight together. After about 20 minutes or so, they do what I like to think of as a cicada sit-up. They bend forward and grab a hold of the shell and then wriggle their abdomen out. And here they are hanging out, looking at what you're seeing. You see the 2 red eyes. That little triangle of red dots is the ocelli, the simple eyes. Those black patches are part of the exoskeleton that's already sclerotized, hardened, so that when the muscles in the body contract, it gives the insect something to help pull itself free. The wings have not yet expanded, and so it'll sit here like this, and then slowly pump up the wings, as you're seeing here. And then eventually they'll be tent-like over the abdomen. That'll take another half hour, 40 minutes, depending on the temperature. After they're like this, in this situation, we've probably gone through about 90 minutes so far, again, depending on air temperature. Another hour, another 90 minutes to 2.5 hours, and they will slowly darken. And that's called tanning. It actually occurs simultaneously with the hardening of the exoskeleton to give you the typical adult periodical cicada that you see here with their red eyes and orange-tinged wings and black body. That whole process takes on average 3.5 hours. And this usually starts not only after the soil temperature reaches 64, 65 degrees Fahrenheit, but what really drives it is when there's a nice soaking rain to sort of soften that up. And then they really pop. That'll be you might actually have a soil temperature hit 64, 65 and nothing happened for a day or so, but then there's that nice that nice soaking rain that can really cause these things to come out in big numbers. Leaving behind are their empty shells. These are really cool. They're rather interesting. There's a lot of data found in these things. You take them to species, you take them to sex. There's a lot of work that can be done on analyzing these. And I've been working at the Wahina Nature Preserve. There's a tree there that The director has collected a bunch of cicadas 17 years ago. Actually now 18 years ago, so it was brood 5, and went back and collected it again 2 years ago, and we're finding almost the same density of the same species occurring under that same tree over the course of the last 2 emergences. And of course, they come out in big numbers, and these overwhelming numbers that we see of the cicada is part of their survival strategy. They like to they come out in big numbers to satiate their predators. These first ones come out will be heavily preyed upon by anything that can, would eat insects. You've got and even things that sometimes don't eat insects. But I've seen, you see raccoons, squirrels. I've seen birds, dogs, cats, even a few people consume these. So and to illustrate, just imagine if you walked outside and found the world inundated with thousands of flying Hershey's Kisses. You'd want to eat a few of them.
Dr. Kritzky, the first question came up already, which I think I know the answer, but you're the expert. I want to protect my new trees while running a band of tree tape to collect insects with the sticky side out, placing it on the trunk of the tree at that bottom height. Will that help prevent these from actually getting up on the tree and causing damage?
Well, it depends on how old the tree is. If your tree is over 5 feet tall, they're not going to probably cause that much damage at all. In fact, a lot of the egg laying, which is what actually causes the resulting flagging, is what causes most of the damage. It's actually for a mature tree like a natural pruning, and indeed the flower set next year will be greater if the cicadas have had taken advantage of the tree for oviposition. We saw in 1987 when brood 10 emerged here, a lot of people used to take aluminum foil and tape that around to provide a barrier, because as the cicadas walk up to the foil, that sort of is a barrier, but they fall. But many of these fly over the tape and what have you. So it'll stop some, but it certainly will not stop all of them by any means. So going back to the numbers that we see here with these cicadas, as I mentioned, seeing the world inundated with hundreds of Hershey's Kisses, you'd probably want to eat a few, and you will get sick of them. And there's only so many cicadas that a bird can have in its crop, in its stomach. There's only so, and literally the predators do get tired of them. I saw this in 1991 when brood 14 emerged in Marymount. I watched a dog on the first day of emergence snapping at these things like crazy. And 4 days later, when I went back out to check to see how the emergence was going, that same dog was on the porch. Its paws were crossed, its head was down, and cicadas were actually landing on it. So it literally does the trick to have millions of cicadas come out. Most predators eat as many as they can. They do get tired. They stop. There's still millions more. So it's a very interesting survival strategy, in contrast to the annual cicadas, the green and black ones that we see starting after July the 1st and into September and October. They're cryptically colored, and you don't see as many of them in the trees by any means. So it's a very different survival strategy that we see with the periodicals. Example of how many. This was a tree that actually, it was in an area where no cicadas actually emerged under this tree. This tree was planted in a development where in 1994, they came in and ripped out all the trees, put in the infrastructure, paved the roads, named the roads after the trees they cut down. And but about 3/4 of a mile away, there was a heavy emergence. And as the cicadas came out, they started expanding. They don't fly very far, usually less than a mile per emergence, but they filled this area up, as you can see, with quite a few cicadas. This was a brood 10 emergence, so we're looking forward to seeing what happens in 2 years when brood 10 emerges in this neighborhood. The whole purpose, once they're in these trees, the males gather in what are called chorusing centers, and they have a structure. You can see that sort of rib structure right in the middle of the cicada. That's at the beginning at the base of the abdomen and on the abdomen. That's a timbal, and that's the sound-producing structure. The male cicada is mostly hollow in its interior that help resonate that sound. Muscles inside pull on the timbal, causing a little popping sound that actually is involved with making the call. Males gather in the chorusing center, and you'll hear the volume of the chorus getting loud and then sort of subsides a little bit and then getting loud again. What's happening is that all these males are in a chorusing center. They're singing in the hopes of attracting a female. If a male is unsuccessful at attracting a female, he will then fly to another tree, and that causes that sound intensity to drop a little bit while he's looking for better opportunities. There are 3 distinct mating calls for the cicada. The first one, I can't repeat them, but it almost sounds like the word pharaoh. Towards the end, when it sort of goes at that downslope, that's when a female flicks her wings. Females do not have the ability to make a call, but so she responds by flicking her wings at a certain point in the male's call. If the male sees it, he'll sing again. She'll flick her wings. He'll walk closer to her. She'll flick her wings when he says he's calling. And then when he's very close, he goes into a second mating call, which doesn't have that gap or a space between the 2 calls. And at that same time, he will then shift to a third mating call where he's tapping the female with one of the 4 legs as he mounts the female and begins to do the nasty. And you see at the top, this is a brood 14 mating pair, and they'll stay mating for about 45 minutes to an hour or so. And the typical cicada, female cicada, will 85% appear to mate only once in their life, 10% twice, and 5% 3 times. And down in the lower left, you see a periodical cicada actually using its ovipositor. There's that black structure coming out of the middle, the underside of the cicada. That's the structure which is used to lay the eggs in the new growth of trees. It's serrated, so it's like a little saw that it can pierce the twig, and then injects about 12 to 20 eggs in pairs along that side. It's about maybe a little over a quarter of an inch in size in length, and then it pulls out the ovipositor, walks forward a little bit, and does it again, and keeps doing that until the female exhausts her total supply of eggs, which I had an undergraduate student count them. We counted 30,000 eggs and found that the average female has around 500 to 503. And that's why they get, if you think about it, all those billions of cicadas, it's a 1-to-1 sex ratio. Even take away 20%, let the predators eat 20%, and you'll still have billions of cicadas, and half of those will be producing 500 eggs. So you can see how the numbers can build really quickly, quite fast. Here's what the egg damage looks like. You can see the tearing up of the branch. There are 3 species of periodical cicadas. They each have a slightly different pattern to the damage they cause. The one at the top is slightly healed from a previous year, and the ones down at the bottom are relatively recent. And this is from September when we collect them. You can actually go into these twigs, and you can carefully dissect out the eggs and see how many hatched. After that, they die. And so you have this whole rolling series of questions. Probably the first one is, why is it so loud? They'll say, well, they hurt my trees. Then the most common question after they all start dying is, what is that smell? And you take literally hundreds of millions of cicadas, get them wet, give them the nice June sun, and they will ferment and decay into quite a stinky mess. And so this is at Spring Grove Cemetery here in Cincinnati, but you'll notice the brown leaves. That's called flagging. And if it's a very heavy emergence, and you've got cicadas laying eggs on the top of the twig or the top and the bottom of the twig, sometimes even on the side, that can weaken that twig so that in a big rain or a windstorm or what have you can cause that twig to break, which causes the leaves to turn brown. There's a couple there that are from broken branches. Sometimes it'll actually interfere with the xylem phloem tissues, causing them to wilt. The flagging itself is the result of egg laying, and it doesn't kill the tree necessarily. It's not necessarily great for the cicadas inside, because we see upwards to a 50% mortality in the eggs laid and branches that do break. And so that's a selection pressure that leads to more success for the cicadas that went further afield than the cicadas are normally emerging, in an effort to find better oviposition sites. The eggs hatch, in 6 to 8 weeks after being laid. And here's what the eggs look like. The one on the left is it's an egg that did not hatch, and the one on the right did hatch. It's more almost like transparent cellophane. So this whole process from coming out of the ground, which starts happening in Paris, Ohio today, the typical emergence takes about 6 weeks to run its course. Most cicadas, if they're not eaten by predators, can last for about a month, but that takes a full week and a half to 2 weeks for all the cicadas to get out, which means that the entire emergence, once it starts, should last about 6 weeks before people stop seeing them come out. And if that's right now, if it starts today, then we'll probably have cicadas pretty well run their course by the end of June. 6 to 8 weeks after the cicadas lay their eggs, they hatch. And up in the scanning electron micrograph photograph you see in the upper right is a 1-minute-old cicada nymph. As soon as they hatch from the eggs, they literally drop to the soil. They don't crawl down the tree. They literally fall out of the tree. And they rapidly try to find a crack in the soil around a blade of grass or a weed or a crack in the soil to get out of off the surface and below the surface, because they're very vulnerable to ants and beetles and spiders at this time. The first thing they do after they get below the soil is start feeding on grass roots for the several weeks. And then by the first of the year, by December 31st, they'll be between 8 and 10 inches below the surface, latched onto a tree root, and that's where they're going to sit and suck for the next 17 years. And on the left, you'll see photographs of at the very bottom, the second instar, the third instar, the fourth instar, and the top is, of course, the fifth instar. And the graph that you see in the lower right is a graph that we did in my laboratory, wanting to know, do they all grow at the same rate? And they don't. As you'll see at age 1, they're mostly second instars. They molted the second time after coming out of the egg. And then by the second and third year, in some cases, they'll actually molt to a third. If they do, they'll probably come out early after 13 years. If they don't, you won't see the third instar still about the fourth or fifth year. Those are what you'll see with 17-year cicadas. But what you see is that the growth rate is variable. And we refer to that as being plastic. It means that the cicadas are bed hedging, if you will, that there won't be a heavy, there may or may not be a heavy frost that could send the frost line below where the cicadas are underground. But what the take-home lesson here is, by the time we get to the 13th year, all the cicadas are fifth instars. That's the stage that we see coming out of the ground now when they emerge, and they will not grow anymore in those last 4 years. Cicadas do need to be hydrated, and indeed this is a Bradford pear, which the cicadas are actually piercing the bark and getting just enough fluid to stay hydrated. And it was when it was really hot, when this picture was taken in 2004, it was an unusually warm spring. People were getting squirted by other male cicadas coming into the area. So they will, that's one of the phenomena that people have seen. They are xylem feeders, which means they're feeding on the tissues that bring the water from the roots up to the leaves. They're not feeding on the phloem. And so for that reason, it's a nutrient poor diet. There's just a couple of amino acids and some minerals. But the cicadas have evolved an endosymbiotic relationship with 3 bacterial species. Each bacterium cannot survive without the other 2. And the 3 can't survive without the cicada. And the cicada can't survive without the bacteria. So it's a really interesting complex. This is something that's just been discovered in the last 15 years, this complement of these bacteria that help, that take these 2 amino acids, some minerals, and water, and they can make another cicada out of it, which is really quite cool. If we could figure out the chemical engineering of what they're doing, there's all sorts of products we could figure out how to make. So the biochemistry is really quite intriguing. Predators. There are a lot of organisms that eat them, and some of the more unusual ones. This is a scorpion fly, and back in 2014, when our 13-year brood 22 came out in Ohio, we were finding along the Ohio River trees with several dozen scorpion flies in them, all taking advantage of the cicadas that got stuck. This is a cicada that probably fell off the tree before it split its skin, got partially up, and they got locked in there because it started hardening its exoskeleton before it got out of the nymphal stage. And you can see a scorpion fly here just drinking the fluid from that still alive, but not for long, emerged cicada. Cicadas get a disease. It's an STD. It's a fungal disease. And what you're seeing on this one is the tip end of a cicada that's got the Massospora infection. On the right is a photograph I took of a spermatheca squash. Spermatheca is a structure in the female abdomen that holds and nurtures sperm, and that's where the spores for late in the emergence come into play. They are actually transferred from the male to the female, which then causes them to germinate, and the abdomen fills up with that chalky mass that you see. And then she flies around spreading the spores throughout the environment as well. How the male gets it, how it initially gets into the population is still a mystery. And one of the frustrating things about it is that it's been impossible to culture this yet so far. Most of the labs trying to have not been successful. I'm co-authoring a paper that's just been accepted by Fungal Ecology. What's really interesting is that the same ingredient found in magic mushrooms is produced by this fungal mass. And male cicadas who get infected with this fungal mass, their behavior changes. They start to act like females. So instead of singing, they flick their wings when another male sings. So it's that's a paper that's in press now. It should be out in the next few weeks. But it's amazing what we're still finding out about these things that have been so much in our faces for the last 300-400 years. If you're lucky, you might find one of the rare blue-eyed cicadas. This was something that actually became more popular back in 2004 when somebody started a thing on the internet saying that Johns Hopkins University was paying $1,000 for blue-eyed cicadas, and people started going out and looking for these things. What it is a cicada that has a gene that's functioning as a dilution gene that's not allowing the normal production of the red pigment for the eye and the base of the wings. If you collect these, depending on how you want to keep them, it's very rare for the white coloration to stay in a pinned specimen, but as you can see, this is quite startling. And back in 2004, we actually had some cicadas found with one white eye and one red eye, one that was mixed, and so on. So be on the lookout for these strange variations in the eye color. But this is probably 1 in a million. But when there are millions out there, it's not necessarily that surprising to find it periodically. So let's get into the nitty-gritty. There are 2 life cycles. One's 17 years long, and there's a 13-year-long life cycle. What we have emerging this year is the 17-year cicada belonging to brood 8. As you can see on when you look at it from the top, the major difference is one is larger than the other 2. But when you look at the underside, you can really see the differences between the species. Magicicada septendecim is on the lower left. It's the larger one. Magicicada cassini is all black on the underside. And Magicicada septendecula has very narrow orange bands. But as you'll see on the one on the far left, that one's quite apparent to tell the difference. You can also slide sex cicadas. On the bottom, you're looking at the underside. The 2 on each side, the far left and the far right, are male cicadas, and the cicada in the middle is a female. You'll notice the males have that more blunt tip to the abdomen. The female is pointed, and there's a crease down the middle. That's where the ovipositor is held in the abdomen. So now you can sex cicadas. Another way you can tell Magicicada septendecim, that's the largest of the 3, is you'll notice in this picture here, between the base of the wings and the eye, there is an orange patch. And so it's really easy to see that. The other 2 do not have that orange patch. So if you're not sure, you can even take these to species with photographs. There are 4 species of 13-year cicadas, 2 large and 2 small. And if you look at the underside of those, you can see the coloration differences. Magicicada neotridecim is on the far left. Magicicada tridecim is next. That's the second from the left. Magicicada tridecassini is on the third one from the left. And Magicicada tridecula is on the far right. You'll notice that the neotridecim that's on the underside of the far left looks very similar on the underside to what we see here with septendecim. and the genetic studies have found that septendecim is almost identical to neotridecim, which suggests that indeed it evolved from a 4-year permanent shift in life cycle. And it looks like, when we look at the genes, it looks like it was a brood 23 cicada that came out 4 years, that interbred possibly with the 17-year cicada that helped this occur. But that's still part of the investigations of what we're doing here in Cincinnati right now. The evolution of these things, it turns out the Magicicada genus is about 5 million years old, and the large species split from the other two about 2.5 million years ago. And then the other two species, the Decula and Cassini, are all less than 1 million years of age. You can see the separation of the major groups of those broods that this study was based upon. But what's interesting is you got 3 distinct species that all come out in synchrony with each other. That's really kind of cool. So what are these broods? Broods are year classes. This was started by Charles Marlett. He worked at the Bureau of Entomology at the Department of Agriculture, and he decided to make sense of these things. He just said in 1893, every cicada that comes out that year, that's brood 1. Every cicada that came out in 1894, that's brood 2. And he reserved the numbers 1 through 17 for the 17-year cicadas. He then reserved, he said in 1893, if it's a 13-year cicada, that's going to be brood 18 and numbers 18 to 30 for the 13-year cicadas. So if it's above 17, it's a 13-year cicada. It turns out there are 15 established broods, 12 17-year cicadas, and 3 13-year cicadas. Broods. And here's their distribution. The blue are 17-year cicadas. The red are 13-year cicadas. You'll notice the 13-year cicadas tend to occur farther south. And they occur only in the eastern half of the United States. Periodical cicadas are as unique to the eastern half of the U.S. as giraffes are to Africa. If we look just at the 13-year cicadas, you can see there's some way down on the Texas border in southern Oklahoma. But the big chunk of these, as you see, are in the northern states, especially in the north central states. The 13-year cicadas occur scattered throughout the southern Atlantic coast area, but mostly along the Ohio, part of the Ohio and Mississippi River Valley, and then into the southern states. They don't get down into Florida, although there were reports of cicadas in Florida back in 2 centuries ago, but we've not been able to find them and verify they were still there today.
One question came in, are they just in North America or are they on other continents?
Periodical cicadas only occur in North America. Now, cicadas occur worldwide. There are about 2,000 species, but only the periodical cicadas, these mass emergence, these red eyes, occur only in North America. They're endemic to the States. That's a great question. Thank you. And here you have it. Here is your periodical cicada decoder ring. It gives you all the dates going back to 1621. We have 1633. If you'll see, that's brood 13. You go over to the far, you'll see there's the first. That's the first historic record. That's every one of the cicada emergences, including what we have going on now with brood 8. As you'll see, brood 8. There's 2019. This chart's only good for 2 more emergences. That's still 34 years, so I won't be needing to use it then. But this allows you to keep track of the years. Once Marlett came up with that numbering system, and they started looking at by brood class, by year class, then it became much more apparent where the cicadas were. And here's where they are. Brood 1, as you can see, is in eastern West Virginia, western Virginia, and right down in southwestern Virginia and northeastern Tennessee. Brood 2 along the Atlantic coast. Brood 3 out in Iowa, Illinois, northern Missouri. Brood 4 in western Iowa, eastern Nebraska, eastern Kansas, western Missouri, southern Oklahoma, and is the only one that gets into Texas of the 17-year cicadas. Brood 5, that was what we had here back in 2016. So you're all familiar with, hopefully, Brood 5. They got into West Virginia as well. Brood 6, that's an interesting one because it's the only established population is in western North Carolina and parts of South Carolina and northeastern Georgia. But as I'll talk about in a few minutes, 17-year cicadas will come out 4 years early. And we have now documented the origin of a new brood here in Southwest Ohio by accelerated brood 10 cicadas coming out simultaneously with brood 6. I'll show you that in a minute. Brood 7 is the most endangered of all of our broods. It occurs only in 2 counties in upstate New York. And what's interesting about that one, that's the only cicada that occurs in that part of the country. So technically speaking, that's probably a different species, but we don't recognize that as a separate species yet. Brood 8, that's what we have coming on this year. As you can see, northern West Virginia, western Pennsylvania, and eastern Ohio. Brood 9, southern West Virginia, Virginia, and North Carolina again. And brood 10, that's the biggest of all the 17-year cicadas. It's in 3 distinct areas, Ohio, Indiana, and out the east, and in Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and so on. And then there's another batch in eastern scattered throughout Tennessee and parts of eastern Kentucky. Brood 13 is the Great Illinois brood, occurs in northern Illinois, parts of northeastern Indiana, Wisconsin, and eastern Iowa. Brood 14 is much more scattered, but it occurs, you'll notice, it looks like it occurs in the same general area as brood 10. And what's going on is brood 14 over the last 200 years has been slowly accelerating into brood 10. So we're getting an idea about how cicada broods change. And that's one of the neat things going on. That's the 17-year broods. The 13-year broods, you'll see down in the 3 down below, we have brood 19, which is in the far left. That's very much in the southern Illinois and Missouri. It covers a vast area, especially along the Mississippi River Valley and some other more wooded areas. Brood 22, down in the originally known only from Louisiana and Mississippi. We have now verified a pocket of brood 22 cicadas in Brown and Claremont County in Ohio and 10 other counties in northern Kentucky. That's the furthest north that we have 13-year broods in Ohio, the only one we have. And so that's 3 new, only 3 of the 4 species emerged here. So all 3 of those are new state records. And then brood 23, the great Ohio-Mississippi River brood, hugs the rivers down at the south. So for Ohio, we have brood 22. This is our 13-year brood. And this is one that my lab discovered and verified. It was kind of weird. It emerged in 1923 along with brood 14. So everybody thought it was brood 14. 13 years later, it came out simultaneously with brood 10. And they all thought it was brood 10. Nobody looked for cicadas in 1949 because they thought we knew them all. And it wasn't until I started checking. What happened was a colleague of mine, Monty Lloyd, found cicadas emerging in 1975 and thought that was 1 year after brood 14, so he thought it was a 1 year late population. I saw that same thing happen in 1988, 1 year after brood 10 in 1987. So we thought, both Monty and I thought we had found a second example of an 18-year emergence cycle. Monty died, and the very day I gave his memorial eulogy at the University of Chicago, I got an email from Falmouth, Kentucky saying, "We got cicadas here." And I started thinking, okay, 2001, 1988, 1975, those are 13 years apart. So I started looking at records, and the Army Corps had in their records on the building of the Miltown Lock and Dam a note that they had to shut down construction for 2 days to get the locusts off the rigs. So now we had 62, 75, 88, 2001, clearly a 13-year brood here occurring here. I published that in my book on periodical cicadas, The Plague and the Puzzle, and nobody believed me. So, so I basically said, wait till 2014, they're going to be here. And so sure enough, 2014, they came back in big numbers, and without people finally accepted that we have a 13-year brood. That's the thing about working with cicadas. You've got to be patient. If I was working with fruit flies, I'd have this done in a couple of weeks, but no, I've got to work with something that takes a generation for one generation. It takes a human generation for it to go through. Of those species for the brood 22, we had 3 of the 13-year forms, as you can see here, looking at the underside. The coloration pattern in the lower left cicada also established that it was a 13-year cicada for those people who didn't quite accept that that was what was going on. Brood 5, this is the 2016 that we mapped out with brood 5. We didn't have an app for brood 5, but we did have web pages that people could record material and just send us their that they note that they saw cicadas, and that's the map that we have. The problem with that is, are we sure that the people reporting these are reporting cicadas? We had a report for cicadas emerging in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean in 2016, right dead in the middle of that, right above the mid-oceanic ridge. And certainly that was somebody that just got the information wrong. So the real concern is how do we go about determining what is a true cicada report or not? And that led to the development of our app that I'll talk about in a few minutes.
So on that map, we did find them in Columbiana County, but we did not find them. We had quite a few people ground truthing and mahoning there and did not find them where that black dot is. So we'd be interested if somebody reported that of where it actually is.
Sure. These reports came in part from magicicada.org, which was essentially a crowdsourcing document. We do have, as I mentioned, we do have brood 5 cicadas in mahoning going back 1897, 1914, 1931 are all mahoning brood 5 records that we have in the historical record. So one of the nice things about getting people, whether they're still there or not, we don't know. Right. We do see that cicadas do dwindle, and the dots represent, the small dot represents widely scattered, not intense populations. The large dots meant you found several areas where there were really heavy, intense swarming cicadas. So it'll be interesting to see what you find this year, and hopefully with the app in the future, we'll be able to document more. The app is designed for people to become one of the scouts on our cicada safari, and what we want people to do is to download the app. It's free. It's available at the Apple Store as well as Google Play, and go out and photograph, see a cicada, the shell, the holes, the turrets, the skins, the adults, photograph it, and submit the photograph. I've got colleagues who are reviewing every single photograph, and if it's verified as a cicada, it goes live on our map. And as of 2 hours ago, we already had 1,600 people sign up for the download the app, and over 1,100 now have already registered as cicada scouts. So we're hoping to get a really good a response rate this year coming up. And brood 8 is one of those broods that for some reason has never had the thorough mapping that we've seen with the other broods. I think it's because it's just 3 years after brood 5. It's like, they're here again. And so the enthusiasm seems to wane. We see that with brood 10 and 14 in Cincinnati. Oh, they're here again. So it's not the same after they've been gone for 13 years.
We have a question. Someone is asking, for the southern areas, is the soil still the trigger, or does the date vary when the emergence actually happens?
It is the soil temperature that's the trigger. In fact, one of the things we saw with the maps for brood 5 and also the maps that we developed for brood 14 is that the southern states, the southern counties, had the cicadas come out first. And over that 2-week period, you'll start seeing them moving northward. I did a study back in 2004 where we looked at the soil temperature under south-facing trees in full sunlight, trees in full shade, but on the north side of the tree, and the variation was such that even in that one area, the cicadas came out over a 7 to 10 day period, depending on how the exposure of the tree and the soil temperature in that specific spot. That's a great question. Thank you. 2 years ago, we had a rather interesting thing happen. Based on my digging up of cicadas and seeing how fast they were growing, I found evidence that the cicadas were growing like 13-year cicadas, these 17-year cicadas. And so in 1991, I said we'd have an early emergence. I went on local media in 1999, made the prediction again. And in the year 2000, we had massive cicadas coming out in parts of Cincinnati, Maryland, and other areas as well. And one of the things that was interesting was that usually when that happens, the predators eat all the cicadas because they don't come out in the same volume of numbers, because every cicada that comes out 4 years early is one that's not going to come out when they're supposed to come out. And so these off-cycle emergences, which have been observed before, usually don't result in any offspring. Well, I actually had a phone call in the year 2000 with some woman said, "Why are all the cicadas in my front yard?" So my students and I went out there, and sure enough, in her yard, they were not only in massive numbers, they were mating and they were laying eggs. And that's the first time we've ever documented a accelerated emergence reproducing. And that's significant. if they should do that again in 2017 at the same place, we will have a perpetuating population, and that indeed happened. So we now have documentation of a new brood shifting reproductively viable individuals coming out 4 years early. And why would that be beneficial? It turns out accelerated cicadas do not get infected with the fungal spores at the same rate as cicadas that have been in an area for hundreds of years. So there's a selection pressure favoring that. These are the reports from our web app that we did in 2017. These are places where people saw cicadas in Southwest Ohio. And as you can see, that's a large extended area. And so what happened, and I'm hoping this will be available in a future version of our app, but what happened is I also started getting people sending me videos of singing with cicadas where their mating was taking place. And this is the distribution of mating in Cincinnati. So from like 5 locations 17 years ago, all over the area in Cincinnati, we had mating going on. So we now have a new brood of cicadas in the state of Ohio, and that's brood 6. So how we're going to call it Neo 6, I have no idea yet, but we actually have now documented the shift in population. That's rather exciting. Here's brood 8. That's studied this year. This is the historic. These dots are based on historic records of where the cicadas have been reported going back to the 19. Let's see, what year would be that? Is it 68, 62? Let me find the chart here. So we have good record. We had a couple of publications come out, not by myself, but by other individuals, reporting where the cicadas, when the cicadas should be coming out. And let me find the map here. And so brood, the last thorough survey for brood 8 occurred in 1968. And that, coupled with historic records that we have in the literature, that's what this distribution map is about. And so our hope is that with your help and the help of your visitors and the app, we can really fill this in and get a good sense of what's going on with the periodical cicadas. And to illustrate why this is important, back when brood 1 emerged back in 2012, a whole new population east of Knoxville, Tennessee was discovered. It'd always been there, but no one ever took the time to tell anybody about it. And there's just not enough boots on the ground to document it. That 13-year brood that we discovered in Ohio, that's just discovered in the last 30 years. That would not have been possible if people had not been sending us records about where maps are, or where cicadas are emerging. Excuse me. So that's what we're really hoping with this year's emergence, that we can really, instead of having just sort of county, we see them in the south east portion of a county or the southern part of a county, but how widely distributed are they in the various counties in eastern Ohio? So we're hoping that will happen with this year's emergence. Here's brood 10, historical, as well as this is based on the 2004 emergence. We got good maps for that. And here's brood 14, that's next out in 2025. Brood 10 will be in 2021, and very heavy in the southern counties, as we see here. So that's what you're going to expect. And it's part of this ongoing structure plan to map out what we have here in the state of Ohio, with cicadas coming out with brood 6 years, brood 10, brood 14, we got brood 8, we got brood 5. We got a lot of cicadas in the state. And then we have the 13-year brood as well. So any questions that you might have? I know it's a lot to take in very quickly, but
okay, we have a couple questions coming in. The first one is, what are the main points about cicadas that we should share with second graders?
Well, the main points with the cicadas is they don't cause disease. They won't bite. They won't carry away your pets. But they're very useful for the ecosystem. A lot of times I get asked, and you probably will, you will all be asked as well, what good are they? Well, for me personally, they got me tenure. But ecologically speaking, when the cicadas emerge from the ground, those holes in the ground are like a natural aeration. Uh, when it rains, water gets to the roots faster. That helps the soil ecology. When the cicadas themselves come out, they're food for all sorts of predators. Every time we've had a major cicada emergence, the turkeys taken during turkey season, the male turkeys had a larger body weight than average. So there's a benefit there. We see when the female cicada lays her eggs in the terminal growth of trees, if they should snap and cause flagging, that's like a natural pruning. The fruit set, the flower set for the next year is actually increased. When they die, they all fall down to the ground at the base of the trees. They start decaying, and that's like a nutrient cache that goes into the soil around the base of the tree to keep those nutrients close by. So there's a lot of things that the cicadas do for the ecosystem, for the forest ecosystem. That's very beneficial.
Great. Okay. Another question. What are their favorite trees, and what trees do they tend to avoid?
Well, they've been reported in over 200 woody species of trees, over 200 woody plants. So there's no one that they're attracted to. There is a situation they seem to be attracted to. When a female cicada is looking for a tree to oviposit, she's looking for a tree that's going to survive 17 years. And they also, since the nymphs feed on grass roots, it looks like she's going to be looking for a tree in full sunlight, surrounded by low vegetation. That describes a lot of our parks and our backyards. And that's one of the reasons why Monty Lloyd, in the paper he wrote, "Why are cicadas more common in cities, in urban areas?" Because that's almost the ideal cicada habitat. They don't avoid trees, so there are trees that they will not do as well in, and that have a higher mortality of the eggs. For example, in white pine, we'll find up to a 70% mortality because the terpenes and other chemicals in the sap kill the eggs. On the other hand, in things like maples and oaks, we can have a 94% successful hatch rate in those trees.
In the fact sheet too, David, it has a list of some of these, and it even lists black-eyed Susans, spirea, raspberry, grapes, things like that. So kind of all over the place, but survival is going to be different. A couple more questions coming. If the tree dies or gets cut down, can they move to a different tree? If so, how far would that be away from where the dead root they were attached to is?
The trees, it depends on, we're going to know more about that after 2025. Marymount cut down all their ash trees and then replanted new trees a couple years later. Generally speaking, if it's in the middle of the cycle and they don't, there aren't trees close by, cicadas will die. It looks like they only move about a yard, 1 square yard under where the eggs, where they fell as a nymph. So they're not burrowing great distances. Now, if a tree is cut down, like let's say a tree was cut down this spring, it's quite, and not all the root system wasn't, they didn't bore in there to get the roots out, what have you. That probably could still sustain the cicada because the water is flowing into the roots. It just sort of maintains that water column. But eventually, if the tree dies and it's early enough in their cycle, that'll kill the cicadas as well.
The next question: can we use your photos in our educational programs?
You're videotaping these. I do have a photo set that I can certainly send you. Most of these photos are copyrighted, but I do have a slide set I can send you that have just the same kind of qualities, but maybe not these exact ones.
So that was from Sheila. So Sheila, I can get that from Dr. Kritsky, and we'll make that available. We'll just make sure you're still giving him credit. A question from Ray Novotny, who's joining me here at the office. Have you personally?
I saw. Is that you? I saw you back there, and I thought you looked familiar, but you're so far back and small in the little screen. How you doing, Ray?
Well, good. He wants to know if you've eaten any cicadas.
Yes, but not for a long time. I'm too fond of them to continue eating them. But I have had cicadas. I've had them stir fried. I've had them in salads. I've had them uh, deep fat fried, breaded. Um, and of course, the next question is, what do they taste like? They're plant feeding, so they taste very green. For me, they taste like a cold can, like a cold Stokely Van Camp's cold canned asparagus.
Huh.
Monty Lloyd thought they tasted like essentially a not mature but a young potato. It was picked a little too soon, rather green and that sort of greenish flavor.
Pops in your mouth, huh?
Yeah, I don't know. Just like Mom wanted to.
Okay, here comes another. Ashley wanted to know about lead. We had someone that told us that had said there's concerns about leads. And is that true that there's any lead concerns about eating cicadas or any other chemical accumulation they might have in their body since they're in the ground so long?
There have been some studies from the School of Engineering at the University of Cincinnati looking at lead concentration, and did find larger concentration of cicadas, especially in areas along roads, and especially some of the county roads that might have might be spread, not that, depending on how they were made, but the asphalt and some of the compounds there seem to be taken up by some cicadas. They found, there's a study that was done, found cicadas along that occurred in areas along certain highways who did have a measurably higher lead concentration. It's not a worry. They're not, just being in proximity is not going to be harmful. And I don't see a lot of people eating them to the point where that's a big concern. But they are picking up metals in the environment, as probably a lot of animals are.
Okay, great. I guess to follow up to that one, would any birds get a lead contamination like they do with shotgun shells and things they find? It wouldn't be that high, right?
We've not seen that because it's not as concentrated as lead shot would be.
Okay, good deal. The next question from Marie: how can the public protect their plants from getting damaged from this egg-laying activity of cicada?
Generally speaking, if the tree is at least 5 feet tall or taller, there's nothing they really need to worry about. Spraying is not recommended because you've got to literally get the spray on the cicada to kill it. So if let's say you spray your tree, by the time cicadas fly there, they may the rain and just leaf growth, for example, so will dilute that pesticide. And indeed, a tree that's 5 feet or taller, they usually do not get zapped harder. I've seen small trees, 3 and 4 foot trees, tall trees that were just planted this spring, that got zapped with so many cicadas that the branches broke and it lost its leaves. But that's not typical of a lot of places. The ideal thing, if you're worried about your trees, you can bag them, but not with a plastic bag. You use something like cheesecloth, but don't wrap them up like a big Q-tip. You want to just sort of create a barrier around them that allows air to flow, and then as soon as and don't leave them up all summer. Be monitored. As soon as the singing starts to subside, take the stuff off. That when the singing starts to subside, there's not that many females going to be laying eggs to cause that much damage left.
Oh, that's a good point. Take them off when they stop singing.
Yep.
So Marie, yeah, we will be trying to promote that to people to not get too excited. They could probably brush quite a few off to prevent extensive damage on something that's small. If they really wanted to kill them, they could put them in soapy water, but I've not had experience with that. Have you? Have anybody trying to put them, Gene, in soapy water?
No, they're dying so quickly because of the bird. As once they lay their eggs, the male exhausts his sperm content, and the female lays their eggs are going to die pretty quickly. You can put them in soapy water, but they'll fly into swimming pools and drown and things like that. But mostly the amount of damage they cause is not that great. So there are instances in the past where small, like somebody just planted a whole bunch of new saplings that they can hurt the saplings. But again, if it's a young tree that's already 8 to 10 feet and has enough branches and leaves on it, it's probably not going to be a real problem. Or better yet, don't plant the new new trees until after the 15th of June.
That's the thing that the landscape companies don't like that we're telling people. So we're trying to talk about protection and moving them off of the under 5-foot type tree or shrub. So hopefully that's good advice. Another one, do they eat anything after they emerge? And if so, if they are eating anything, is it damaged?
Their cicadas are sucking insects, so they only take, they're fluid feeders. So the only thing they are taking in is going to be the xylem fluid from trees. And a nice illustration that right now all over Mahoning County there are probably thousands of cicadas feeding on trees, and you cannot look at a tree and say, "Ah, that's got cicadas on it." So they're taking the water, some amino acids and minerals, but they're not taking a lot of nutrients, not taking any nutrients at all from the phloem and the sugars that the trees are planting, are producing, I should say. So the only reason the only thing they need to do when they come out as adults is keep hydrated.
Is there any damage when they do take water from the tree under the bark? Is there any damage that would have, or it's too wet a time of year that wouldn't really have any effect at all?
It doesn't have any effect whatsoever that I've seen, and I've seen these, but it looks like almost like somebody sort of like a little raindrop that hit on the underside of a branch. You might see this little patch about the size of a dime that looks wet. That's from the feeding, but it's not enough to cause real significant harm to the tree.
Great. Okay, anyone else have questions? You can type them into the chat box, or you can unmute yourself at this point in time if you would like to ask a question.
There is a quiz, by the way. While you're thinking of, let me tell, if you get the phone, when you get the app, there is at the very lower right-hand corner, there is a link that takes you to more information. That more information includes an activity section. So there is a cicada that kids can color. There is the instructions on how to fold an origami cicada. There are activities of what you can do to understand, interview your grandparents if you're lucky to have your grandparents around. Do they remember past cicada emergences? You can have people go to the library and look up, go to newspapers from cicada years to see if they can find references to cicadas when they emerged and what dates they were, and look at that. If they're older or their parents are crafty, they can get plaster of Paris and pour it down a cicada tunnel, one of the emergence holes. Let it sit for a couple days, and then excavate it like an archaeologist to see what the tunnel looked like. That's always kind of fun as well. But you'll find that in the more information. We also have links to magicicada.org from the University of Connecticut. Those are colleagues of mine that I've worked with for years. And also Cicada Mania, probably the most prominent cicada website out there as well. And that's all things cicadas, not just periodical cicadas. And there's also links to my, this is the cheesy plug, but there's links to all my cicada books. In Ohio's Backyard, which is still present, although the new version, which is an ebook, I think it's $3.99 on Amazon, is a history of the cicada, but also has the historic database of all 7,000 historic records from cicadas. That's published by the Ohio Biological Survey, and the periodical cicadas, The Plague and the Puzzle, was published by the Indiana Academy of Science, and that's a book on the history of cicadas, giving you how our knowledge has changed from the very beginning. I mentioned when William Bradford said a sickness would follow, and when they were first reported in the 1630s. That's the plague, and then the puzzle, their biology and evolution. As well as a whole series of FAQs. The app also has, there you go, so there you are. And the app has a series of what we call cicada stories. And so I'll see, here we go. There's the icon for it right here. Once you load it, and once again, you'll see it open up. These are each cicada stories. So if you're interested in the species or what have you, you just touch these and it'll take you into some of the information I gave you tonight. The map get the front of the map here. We've already got some reports. There we go. The map shows where cicadas have been reported, and you can actually tap on the pictures and see photographs to verify for yourself what people are seeing. We've already had some straggler cicadas reported. We've had 3 come up in Cincinnati and a couple in the Washington, D.C. area, which are both brood 10 populations. And they're coming up 2 years early.
Great. We still get a lot of questions about what the app is. Just a reminder, it's in the chat box. When you go to the Apple App Store or Play Store on Google, just type in Cicada Safari. It will come up as Mount St. Joseph University. Make sure you look at that to make sure you have the right one. We also have this book that we've used a couple times, and we might be having some fun cooking with cicadas. If you're interested in a recipe, let me know. We'll share that as well.
I should point out that if you decide if you do wish to eat them, and that's we want to keep cicadas around. But the one that you see on your screen right now, that's the white 10-year-old adult. That's the one you want to eat because when they turn dark black, it's like eating the tail end of the shrimp. This is all soft, so the whole animal can be consumed. You don't have to be, otherwise you should pick off the legs. And it's like, as I say, there's not a lot of nutrient there, but it's like eating the sort of the papery, harder material that you see that you hold onto when you get a shrimp, for example. So that's what you look for here.
Yeah, good deal. I unmuted David and maybe even Ashley. Do you guys have any more questions?
None that I can think of at this time. This is a very good. Thank you.
Ashley?
Not that I can think of. It's amazing how the broods were separated. I'm just taking it in.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we're doing the mapping is that brood 8 is it's an interesting brood. If we're doing things by Fourier accelerations, where what caused brood 8's evolution? For example, we have brood 5, and 4 years earlier we've had brood 1 emerges, this small emerges. It's not enough to reproduce, but we've had that in Ohio. But there's no brood 12 out there that's accelerated to 8, and if brood 8 accelerates, it comes out with brood 4, and that's over in Kansas and Nebraska. So there's no relationship between those. So it's an interesting thing that we're hoping that the maps and their distribution help us get a better understanding of the relationship of the broods to each other.
So Dr. Kritsky, if they accelerate and crash into the timing of another one, do they get renamed as that other brood? You mentioned like a Neo 6. Are they just renamed to that time frame, or are they kept separate?
Well, we so far it's only happened once that we can actually document this, and so we haven't developed any kind of nomenclature for that. Except it's clear that I wrote a paper for the history. It's called the Historical Analysis of Indiana's Periodical Cicadas, and I can actually show how in the 19th century, brood 14 was really big, and in the 20th century it had dwindled down, and brood 10, which occurred in every county of the state, save one, is now only in 2/3 of the counties. And then we have areas where brood 10 has been, we see 6 popping up. And so that's about like a 300-year cycle. So this has been going on for centuries. This is just the first time we've seen this with brood 6. So right now, my feeling is Marlet's system's pretty good. We'll call it brood 6. When people start looking at, well, what's unique about brood 6 in Ohio, then brood 6 compared to brood 6 in North Carolina, that's where the information will come out.
Gotcha.
Time to update our fact sheet, Ashley. Great. Okay, I don't see any more questions in there. So like I said, we've recorded this. So for our volunteers that didn't get a chance to see this, we really want you to download the app. Make sure you're documenting that emergence. Like Dr. Kritsky said, we heard from Stark County that they found some either this morning or yesterday. I've sent her the app to make sure she documents that. Tell all your other Master Gardener and volunteer naturalist friends. We'd like to get as many of these documented as we can and be able to answer folks' questions when they call in. They do freak a lot of people out that don't know this or moved here in the past 17 years or moved to a new house in the past 17 years where there used to be a lot of woods. And hopefully, if there's still some trees, they will definitely have some emerge. So thank you again, Dr. Kritsky. We really appreciate your time and effort. For those of you listening, he will also, yes, Sheila asked if we put in the newsletter. Yes, we will. He will also be back on June 8th, right, Ray?
Yes.
What time is the program?
11 to noon inside at the Austin Town Senior Center. And then we're going to find a hot spot and go in the field for them.
Great. So Ashley will be joining us on the 28th, kind of a early emergence, and then Dr. Kritsky later on June 8th. So different days of the week. We have 250,000 people just in Mahoning County. So if we get 1,000 each one, that'll be great.
Excellent.
So, wonderful. So thanks again, everybody. Once you log off, I will send out the email to everybody, and we appreciate your time. Have a great night.
Thank you, Eric.
Yay.
How do you log off?
Wonderful. Okay, they're logging off. Gene, thank you again very much. And
My
look
pleasure.
forward to seeing you here in, 3 weeks. It's hard to believe it'll be that fast. So,
I hope this is what you were hoping for. This is the first time I've done something like this usually I'm always watching an audience reaction, what have you, but it was quite enjoyable.
good, wonderful. Yeah, I'm watching them as they go, and Ray and I are looking at the questions and what's being asked. So we like to keep that moving and made sure we had everybody muted so that nobody's cats purring in the background or dogs barking or phones ringing and etc. So hopefully that was minimized there at the very beginning.
How do you log off?
Just hit the end meeting down at the bottom, Jim, or at the top, just hit the close button and it will take you right out.
So,
And it looks like Gene held up his iPhone that he's already downloaded the app during the program.
Oh, good. Excellent.
All good. All right.